Survival to you, and thanks for tuning in to Do No Speak. I think it will become clear enough, but I'd like to be transparent that these are my thoughts and ramblings, and I represent no higher authority and have never represented any higher authority with regards to this or any franchise. I am Ike Duno. There's so much we don't know, so many thrilling, dark lore corners where we can be creative. Who's to say what's there? Some can know, but likely not you or I. We do not know, and speculation on the unknown is philosophy in such barren, uncertain times. I do know we have an obligation to engage in philosophy. Today's topic, the Enclave, Appalachia, and the long game. So there's a opening when we think about the mobile base that the Enclave used in Fallout 3. And Oxhorn brings up a good point. They didn't drive it all the way up there from Florida, did they? That's fascinating. And I wonder, it probably wasn't doing what it's doing for the Enclave in Fallout 3 at the time of the war. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I think a fascinating side thought is that there's probably two of them, and always has been in the Fallout universe anyway, that you take the contact thought, right? That if it's important enough that you have to build it, then you have to build two, and you build the second one in secret in case the first one gets blown up. At least that's the lore. That's what you bury in the consoles. But my thought is that it's likely not the same crawler, but a different crawler, a secret crawler that's just like the launcher crawler from Cape Canaveral. Anyway, point is, Fallout 76 hasn't really introduced us to a live Enclave yet, but rather they've allowed us an opportunity to steward a wayward aspect of the Enclave in the form of Modus and Sodus. To a lesser extent, Sodus. That's a shame. I hope we get to see more of her. She's pretty cool. So, in the end, I feel like Fallout, anybody having a Fallout experience, it should be tragicomic with an emphasis on the tragedy. And, hang on, my phone's dark. Alright, right. So, I believe it would be epic if Enclave lovers could be introduced to the Enclave in the form of them moving a much less decrepit and much more effective mobile platform, what we would eventually encounter and destroy in Fallout 3. Only, in this story, they're obviously going to go against this recent outcrop of the Brotherhood of Steel, and the Brotherhood of Steel is going to align themselves against this Enclave by necessity because of Roger Maxim's, he's a traitor to the United States of America. Gosh darn it. So there can really be no peace there, and the amount of organization that he's built in their absence, just it wouldn't be tolerated, so they have to be wiped out. And that means that, which I think is why the Brotherhood has this prevalence in the 76 universe toward being pro-civilian and pro-settler, that sort of thing. And it's not that the Enclave is pro-raider, far from it. They are pro-destruction of any alternate lifestyle, right? Like, only the United States of America has the authority in their eyes to make changes to the way a place is governed, whether it's been bombed or taken over by mutants or whatever. It's irrelevant to the Enclave. And certainly in Fallout 76, where it's only been 30 plus years since the bombs dropped, now, to the people of West Virginia, it might seem that the Enclave has disappeared, but that's ridiculous. We know that they're around hundreds of years into the future. So at this point, it's only been 30 years. They're not only around, they are setting their craziest plans in motion. So yeah, I think the Enclave represent the part of the United States that believes there is victory, regardless of how the war might change the battlefield, right? So if you believe that you have a sovereign right to rule, like the Enclave do, then even global thermonuclear war is not enough for you to tip your hand and forfeit the game. Indeed, a new game starts when the bombs drop, and I'm going to call this the long game. And I think the Enclave believe that they are in a long game with the forces of communism, right? And so in 2020, we often attribute that directly to the Chinese, and through Fallout, we often discount the role of the Soviet Union in favor of the Chinese. But I think ostensibly, if you are telling a story from the perspective of the Enclave, then both of these are bad actors in your worldview that says that you can purchase a better life. And that has to be, at the end, what the Enclave has to offer, is the promise of a price tag on a better life. Indeed, when we think of Vault Tech as an organization, we can paint the picture of them being greedy corporate controlling things, and that's great. I think a lot of people really resonate with the story of a heartless corporation looking to make a cheap profit off of the individual at the expense of the individual, and that's the easy way of looking at Vault Tech. But the more difficile way of trying to figure out what's important about Vault Tech is that they are ultimately supported and somehow in collusion with the Enclave. When we say the Enclave and we say collusion with Vault Tech, we mean collusion pre-war. So the Enclave, I'm sure it's a thing, much like, and I presume it's a literary reference to like Skull and Bones societies, Freemasons, that sort of thing. Plans within plans, and secret guild masters, that sort of thing. And certainly, if I was writing Enclave backstory, I would try to take it as far back down that road as possible. All the way back to Teddy Roosevelt and his gallivanting all across the oceans, or Edison, Ford, and Firestone hauling ass all over the land on their cars. Getting an idea how highways might lay out in the future. That's a thing. That happened. I would lean on that as a, certainly it leans toward the promise that I mentioned earlier, the promise that the Enclave has a price tag that they can place on a better life, much like their forebears, the people that came before, the extreme corporate powers that enabled the world that they came from. So the long game says, just because each nation has been pelted by atomic bombs doesn't mean that the communist central powers are not attempting to find out whether or not they won. And indeed, the Enclave believes that they need only regain some aspect of military control, and then they can go across the Pacific, and then they can go see whether they won. Somebody must have won. That's the theory here. Amongst those who believe the long game is in play, is that somebody must have won. And it can take perhaps a generation to find out whether or not the win was easy. Right? Now we know, because Fallout continues, we know that the fiction continues, and that the U.S. military certainly does not reestablish control over the nation. None of that stuff works. It sucks, and everything's going to get suckier, and nothing's ever going to go right. So we know that the Enclave is entirely wrong. But 30 years after the bombs, in the era of the 76 universe, well, we don't know any of that. And certainly they don't. They're prepared to play for generations, and the proof is that they are actively working at the highest echelons of Vault Tech, not to preserve life, but to run their space travel and generation ship experiments. Right? That is truly, that's the silver tuna. You pull off the ultimate victory, you get generation ships and the ability to control how they operate. And that's what they believe they get in exchange for winning the long game. And I presume they believe that the communists will win that victory if they win the long game. They will get that prize. And obviously capitalists believe that you can't rescind that prize, you can't let it slip out of your grip, because it is the future of human progress, and if you can't put a price tag on it, then you cannot put a price tag on a better life, and then you lose. So that's the long game, at least as far as I feel the Enclave should see it. And the different stars around the E perhaps have their own interpretation of how they intend to weather the long game and turn out the victors. We should experience that in Fallout 76. Obviously, the tragedy is easy for the Steel and anybody who picks that, because the Enclave is coming for them and will wipe them out. Just, it seems like they're, once, like, we're merely stewarding Modus in this interim time. You know, the mobile fortress is coming, or certainly its agents are coming. And they will set Modus correct if they can, and they can, because we can. You know, if goofballs from Virginia can take control of it, then hyperpower armored United States soldiers can take control of it. Easy. Perhaps temporary, perhaps they'll die, the way that the people that were in the bunker died originally. But, anyway, for the moment, the Steel will be wiped out, and we know that the Steel, as we see it, will likely be aligned with the settlers at Foundation, so they'll be wiped out. And if the Enclave has any trouble, and they likely will have trouble because of the plucky heroics of the Brotherhood of Steel, then they will lean on the Crater Raiders to make sure that the Steel is wiped out, and anyone that supports them, including Foundation. And then ultimately, since the Enclave doesn't have any faith in the long-term existence of either Crater Raiders or anybody outside of their control, once the Steel disappears from Virginia, they just cut off their support for the Raiders, and I presume continue their activities elsewhere. You know, and a big old question mark as to how their ascendant impact on the East Coast and the East-West, the Mid-East, that area, the Appalachia. How does their impact, after being so clear and strong, fall away by the time of Fallout 3? Yep. Fallout 76 would be well served by a visit from the Enclave mobile compound that we would later see in Fallout 3 and get to destroy, if we choose. Thanks for listening. Happy Duno!